I take no qualms in saying that episode 9 of Volume 8 is the best episode the volume has had so far. In fact, it's the only episode in the volume that truly captured me and had me invested. When I was watching, my mind was like thinking of jokes that could be used in the abridged. There was no looking at the time, seeing what was left, making sure it all fit into my schedule. I was actually getting into the episode. I was getting into the hype moments. It successfully got me into the show again. Well, the episode. It's not without its weak moments, but for the most part, the episode's worst bits are hilarious Salem moments. Let's start with the writing, and for the first time in the volume, it felt like the writing was competent, had an idea what it was doing, and had a sufficient level of maturity to it. Ren's awkwardness when explaining his new semblance power fit into his character. Ren doesn't like oversharing. He finds it awkward to tell people about his new power, especially because these people aren't Nora. To people who are, smart enough to figure out what his ability is, it adds a little something. Sure, it's just boring exposition for the audience's sake, but it makes sense in-universe for him to be explaining it, and there is a hint of characterization to it. There's no moment in the episode where I found Yang obnoxious, which in recent years has been very, very sparse, those moments where she's not just annoying. She's not doing much of the episode, but she is being Yang, which is good. Hell, she actually remembers Summer as her mother. Fucking took you long enough. Ren having to explain that she is afraid while John isn't, though, I feel like that wasn't necessary. It didn't really add anything to the episode. I could deduce that with sufficient context clues, my guy. Oscar, meanwhile, all series, has been a character with many avenues to take his development that weren't really approached in any sufficient way. But here, there's like a hint of something. Sure, I mean, there probably has been, and I probably brought this up in the past. Oh, there's a little hint of character here. But I like how blunt it is. Doesn't want to fuse with Ozpin. He makes it clear. He's afraid of it. He's not ready. Hesitation. Oscar as a character is starting to form into something. I like the very brief scene of Marrow and Winter talking about the whole plan. Winter is steadfast in her convictions, but she's clearly hesitant. There's a clear and obvious indication that she knows what she has to do to serve her kingdom, but also doesn't really want to because she knows she'll sacrifice the lives of kids and friends of her sister. But from her point of view, sure, they're kids, but sacrificing them to save the entire kingdom is a sacrifice worth being made. I really hope they don't ruin this by having Winter become just the same as the rest of Team RWBY, not having the hard edge necessary to make those difficult decisions. Sure, yeah, she let Weiss and everyone go at the end of the last volume, but in that regard, it didn't really jeopardize anything, and she still got people, she still did her duty and got people to come over to get her. She just didn't try to stop them herself because she was in a rough, state. So it's fine. It's Winter here, she's making a tough decision and it weighs on her, but she does it because that's who she is. She knows the sacrifices that have to be made in these situations. Mara, however, expresses the other side of that. What makes Mara different to the rest of the entire army from what we've seen is that he's not for that level of thinking. Or not that level. That makes it seem like it's dumb to think otherwise. Oops, let me rephrase that. He's not into that way of thinking. He doesn't think that sacrifice is worth it because they're just kids. Maybe he's different because he's a faunus who's had to deal with a different upbringing and being discriminated against, and he's developed different core values to the rest. That might be a bit much to hope for, that they'll integrate his being a faunus and, they'll integrate Marrow being a faunus, Marrow thinking differently to the rest, and Marrow being an Atlas, which is the most racial place. Maybe they'll integrate those all into his character. That might be a bit much to hope for, but if NetherRealm can integrate Kung Jin's sexual orientation subtly into his character, then Rooster Teeth can have its broken clock being right twice a day moment too. And see, Rooster Teeth, you didn't need the crutch of Ren explaining these feelings. You could figure them out. Not to say that I'm going to complain every time Ren does that. After all, Ren telling everyone that Emerald is afraid just sort of felt natural to the progression of that scene. But let's get to the prediction I'm most happy came true. Hazel is, for a RWBY character, good. I'm not going to give any backhanded compliments about what he'd be in any other show. Hazel's just generally a good enough character. You can understand where he's coming from to an extent, why he trusts Oscar, because he's that simple a guy, He learns that Oscar wasn't lying. This is the one thing he could prove Oscar wasn't lying about. Why would Oscar lie? He's telling the truth. It's a simple way of thinking, and it can easily be manipulated, but he's working for Salem, so I already know he can be easily manipulated. What I really like is that he doesn't even hesitate to bring Emerald with him. Like, in the end, Hazel's an adult. He sees Oscar and Emerald as children, and he cares about making sure they're safe, because they are just kids. Hell, Hazel smiles for, I think, the first time in the series here. Sure, it doesn't carry the weight of, say, Vector Prime smiling for the first time in Transformers Cybertron, but it still carries something which I can appreciate. Hazel buffing himself up with 4 entire dust crystals and going ham on Salem was the most hype moment in the volume. I actually got into the action. I gave a shit about Hazel, and given I haven't given a shit about the well-being of any character in a fight this entire volume, that's a good thing. Emerald, however, well, I'm not sure. I feel like there are some steps missing in her conversion to a good guy. I see everything was like building up to it. It was blatantly obvious she was going to turn good guy, but her turn here felt out of nowhere still. Like, I think if anything, what was missing was a scene of her with Cinder, like just a final moment with her and Cinder where, you know, she sees Cinder and she truly comes to with her convictions. It feels all episode that she's forgotten about her clinginess to Cinder. It just feels weird, and it's not like Emerald took action to leave. If anything, it feels like Hazel forced it onto her. I don't know, it just... I can't properly explain it, but it feels like, even though everything's been building up to it, it still came out of nowhere. Like, there wasn't a moment, you could say, where Emerald turned good guy. It just sort of, and I'm getting you out of here too. Okay. I don't know, it just doesn't carry the same weight to me as Hazel's betrayal. Like, I'm not expecting an Armada Starscream here, but I would have just liked if maybe the time they spent into the pointless Hound stalking Whitley scene last episode was put into this episode to make Emerald's defection feel more cohesive. Oh yes, and I like the use of keep moving forward, as it didn't feel forced or cringe, and like, it was just put in just because Monty It felt like if you don't understand where the keep moving forward things come from, it still fits into the scene, and it doesn't stand out. I definitely remembered to put this note into my first draft, and I did not shoehorn it in at the last moment. And overall, yeah, that was what was good about this episode. As for issues, there were some small things, they're not huge. Like, why are Funky the only ones in Atlas that are very obviously huntsmen? Like, all these other people are just regular blokes. We don't really see, or at least I didn't notice, any huntsmen. Like, it feels like there's just 10 huntsmen, the Aesops and Team Funky. And my issue with that is that it doesn't feel like the Huntsman Academy is integrated into the military when I look at it. This feels like any other kingdom has been attacked and has just hired some huntsman teams to help, as opposed to these huntsman teams being well integrated into the academy. Like, it's just a bit of visual storytelling that wasn't put in, I feel. Could have been. And then there's Salem. She's just so funny. And while it can be entertaining to watch her emote, it also ends up making some scenes just weird. The tense moment where you think Hazel and Emerald are going to be exposed because they're being suspicious, it's kind of made hilarious by Salem's fucking run. It's like she's combining the Naruto run with Alpha Quintessence flailing from Transformers Energon. Somehow I've mentioned every single installment of the Unicron trilogy in this video. That just sort of happened. And yes, every scene with Salem is really funny one way or another. Can they just not have her emote in a way that's, like, normal? Like, I get she's not meant to be normal, but when the way they over-exaggerate every emotion, from so neutral that she looks like she's high off her skull, or so happy it looks like she just had the biggest orgasm of her life, or just so angry that it looks like she's taken a massive shit in her dress. Like, can I not just make her emote in a way that isn't funny? Like, her Stretch Armstrong meteor-catching arms grabbing Emerald is just funny. I think this disinterested face from her is the first expression I've seen in Salem that doesn't look funny to me. She's just like, really? Come on. It's funny how a look of complete dissatisfaction is the best expression a character model has achieved, because that's how I feel whenever I look at her. Fuck, when Hazel socks her in the face, that was the one moment of his that was kind of ruined. And it's because of her model. Look at it. It looks like he hit one of those Bobo the Clown dummies. Like, why? But yeah, this episode overall was good. It solidified Hazel as the best written antagonist of the series, not much of a benchmark when all the others are great purely by nature of being actually entertaining, but it's still a benchmark. And if I'm being honest, just that single scene of him stabbing himself with dust crystals was more hype than anything he actually did in the fight. I hate to say it, but what saddens me the most is that Hazel just sort of shot some fireballs, punched Salem a few times, and dropped a rock on her. He didn't really get much of a way of a big hurrah that'd make his Goku and Piccolo versus Raditz sacrifice really satisfying. Oh. Oh, she's on fire because Salem witch trials. Oh, for fuck's sake. This is like the whole thing with naming the guy in Cinder's story Rhodes. Oh, it's funny because Rhodopus, the original story of Cinderella, the original story that Cinderella is taken from and derived from. We're so clever. It's one of those moments where it just feels like, oh, right, because her name is Salem. In the end, though, this episode was satisfying. I'm happy with how it turned out in the end, and honestly, I hope this isn't Rooster Teeth's broken clock being right twice a day moment. I'm hoping it's the new status quo, and I hope in vain, but, I hope that we just get episodes as consistently not bad as this. Also, this is the closest we've gotten to seeing Neo's ass, and I'm honestly hoping that Neo isn't going to go to Jen and be like, "Is Roman Torchwick alive?" For us to then learn that Roman is alive, or Roman is a Grimm now, he's a hound, ooh. Just, you know what, if anything, just let Neo do something cool this volume. She's been a total joke.